Our next panel will focus now on the scientific collaboration between India and the US. Our moderator, Kai-Yi Lee, is a professor of chemistry at the Institute of Biophysical Dynamics, the James Franck Institute, and the college at the University of Chicago. She is also the university's vice provost for research and serves as the chair of the committee of the University of Chicago's Hong Kong Faculty Advisory Committee. Professor Lee works with faculty and deans to enhance and expand research activities at the university and oversees large-scale research structures. She manages the university's research administration, development, safety, computing, as well as numerous endeavors in the science that cut across divisions, schools, and institutes. Professor Lee, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth panel today in our celebration of our 5th anniversary. And so as you can see, the title of this panel is on collaboration in science. And I think the collaboration can be taken in two different ways. So as we know, as science in the 21st century has become highly interdisciplinary. So one way of thinking of collaboration sort of goes across the traditional boundaries of the traditional disciplines. But also, at the same time, tackling big scientific problems increasingly necessitate international collaborations, and nation-states are no longer able to operate in silos if they were to thrive. So in our scientific inquiry, of course, we know that the very fundamental point of this is really for the creation of new knowledge. But as important, these inquiries can also lead to innovation. So one of the questions that we want to ask and address is, what are the effective ways to really accelerate scientific discovery, as well as to really push and drive innovation? In other words, how do you bring our ideas and our results from the lab to sort of something that can actually benefit society and be impactful? At the same time, one of the challenges that we're facing as a global community is that the ability to make sure that the training of the next generation of talented skills in STEM is really challenged. And this is a little bit dovetailing on the discussion earlier on the early childhood development panel of how do you really make sure that you open all possibilities to children when they are sort of exploring the different kinds of career opportunities. And so, as articulated by the Indian finance minister, demographic trend worldwide show that major economies will face severe labor shortages in the future, and in particularly in the STEM area. And so, it was very good for us to hear in the 2019 Union budget, which announced the establishment of a new educational policy to transform India's higher education system into one of the best educational systems in the world, as well as a national research foundation to fund, coordinate, and promote research in the country. So I hope that sort of framed the background of the kind of discussion that we want to have in looking at the collaborations between University of Chicago and India. And so I'm going to introduce sort of one speaker, one panelist at a time, and then they would tell them a little bit about their work. So to my left is Sandeep Verma, who is a professor of the IIT in Kanpur in the area of chemistry, and also affiliated with biological sciences, bioengineering, Center for Nanoscience, and Center for Environmental Science and Engineering. So talking about interdisciplinarity, that is an embodiment of that. But he also served as the secretary for the Science and Engineering Research Board, the SERC, whose mission is really to promote basic research in science and engineering and to provide financial assistance to persons engaged in such research, academic institutions, research and development laboratories, and industry alike. And SERC aims to build up the best practice system, which would match the best global practices in the area of promotion and funding basic research. And we are very happy to say that SERC funds this both and Corona Scholars Program, and each year the orientation actually takes place in Chicago. So without further ado.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very happy to be here. This is the 5th anniversary of University of Chicago Center in New Delhi. I have some connection to Chicago. I lived there for about 5+ years for my PhD. So it's doubly interesting to be here and then interacting with all of you. So to tell you a bit about what I do, what my agency, which is Science and Engineering Research Board, does is that we are the flagship funding agency in India whose core mandate is to support fundamental research in all areas of investigation. So our tagline primarily goes from atoms to astrophysics. So everything in between is funded by us. So with the help of a variety of Board of Studies, program advisory committees, we solicit new proposals, we solicit new ideas all year long, and we make judgment of what research is to be funded and how we can leverage the money which is being invested by Ministry of Science and Technology to catapult Indian science to a league where we could be a force to reckon with. And at the same time, we have to be aware with our guards on, basically, that what are the frontline areas which we must be aware of. We should, on priority basis, we should fund them to ensure that our cutting edge still remains viable and our scientists are getting enough support in an area, depending on kind of investment you require, so that they can perform and deliver quality science. So we run quite a number of programs, as I said. So we have programs in core research areas where we have grants which you could get for 3 years, for 5 years for established investigators. At the same time, we are quite aware that when we have newer colleagues who join an academic institution or research laboratory, they require quick funding. So we also have accelerated programs for younger colleagues where they can get results rather quickly. So once they join, they are about to start their career, we endeavor to offer them solutions and results where they can start their research careers as early as possible. Then if you come a bit more down, so we have real young talent who have just gotten a PhD. They are rearing to go for a postdoctoral fellowship. So we have fellowship schemes. We have sort of brain gain schemes where colleagues or Indians who are working in foreign countries, in the USA, for example, how to bring them back. So we have very, very lucrative funding schemes which would bring back such talent, and they would be then assimilated with our education system, with our academics, with our research laboratories, and we try to provide them, of course, to a certain extent, the best laboratory conditions possible so that they can perform and deliver what they have been doing before they get selected for such opportunities. We have quite a number of programs on equity. So certain sections of society which require very, very focused funding to bring them up. So we have equity programs. That is one very sort of key mandate available with us. At the same time, we also look at our seniors. So this is a new program. As we go along, I'll talk about it. We have what we call as National Science Chair program, where we are solely looking at our colleagues who have been in the system for a while, and this National Science Chair is available to colleagues who are between 65 and 75, because usually around 65 years of age, most of us superannuate, we retire. But what we want to do is that we do not wish to let go some of these top individuals who have been contributing for a while. So we have this program of National Science Chair, which will offer an incredible amount of fellowship plus funding support so that their research never gets slowed down. And that is only handpicked, so it is not available for everyone. So at that stage of their career as well, they have to remain competitive. They have to remain at the top of their game, if you will, right? So it is a program, I think we think that it's a good tribute to our highest performing senior colleagues who we would like to retain them as mentor, because as and when systems develop, systems emerge out of as the decades progress, we believe you need correct mentorship, or at that high level of mentorship, to bring out the best in youngsters who are trying to sort of get in the system. So that is one core mandate of Science and Engineering Research Board. And also our parliament, which has instituted this board, has given us the power to work inter-ministerial fashion, in an inter-ministerial fashion. For example, our Ministry of Human Resource Development can work with us, and we are allowed to take funds in an effortless fashion to run programs for them. So it's more or less like they trust us with their money. We evolve their programs, we completely take over the program, make calls, make judgments, and deliver it to what these ministry wanted. So Ministry of Information and Technology, Ministry of Human Resources, Food and Agriculture. So we have at point of times, we have had money from them, and we have created niche programs where we can bring out the best in or best projects from our individuals. So these are the few attributes, and finally, I'd like to tell you, some of you have been telling since yesterday, sort of trying to make the right buzz, that today we unveiled 4,000 crore initiative of the ministry through SERB, which is on cyber physical systems. So we are now going to invest quite a bit of money for next 5 years to bring out bring out the capabilities, or bring the capabilities to the global level in the areas of artificial intelligence, deep learning. You go for robotics, cybernetics, data analytics. So whole bunch of verticals that one can envisage around man-machine interface is going to be funded for next 5 years. And we have this real belief that with our strength in computation, with our strength in information technology, we will be able to catapult ourselves in a very defined way in next 5 to 10 years. And that's where Indian science would go, and that's where this would be one of the key areas we would like to sort of contribute and show to the world that we have our own indigenous technologies which we can leverage for future activities. So I'd like to just stop here, and as the discussion progresses, I'd like to pitch in.
Great,
Thank
you very much. And so let me introduce the next panelist as Yamunakrishna, my colleague in the chemistry department at the University of Chicago. Yamuna is an expert in looking at biological nano devices, and in fact, in 2011, while she was in the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, she was the first person that put a DNA nano device into a living organism. And so she has won many awards, but I won't sort of go into the detail. But not only is she an excellent bench scientist, but she's also a innovator and a scientific entrepreneur. On top of that, she has been really deeply engaged in the Bose Khurana Scholars Program, bringing Indian top students to the United States. So,
thank you, Kai. So I'll just tell you a little bit of my background. So I did my PhD in the Indian Institute of Science, and then I went abroad for a short stint for postdoc, and then I came back to India and set up my independent laboratory in Bangalore. In the National Center for Biological Sciences, where I developed a breakthrough technology that I realized needed to go as soon as possible into patients. It just so happened that I had to then move to a place where the innovation could be translated as fast as possible, and I found the best place on the planet for this was University of Chicago, because it was one of the few places that had physical sciences in very close proximity with the clinical sciences. And if innovations were going to happen, it was going to happen fast over here. And so I always consider myself as a daughter of Indian science and a well-treated daughter-in-law of the US system. In a way, it's really nice to be a bridge between these two systems, because it allows me to bring the best talent and the people who make it happen in touch with each other. And I see myself as a bridge between both systems. So naturally, when I was approached to join the Delhi Center, I was so excited because I could bring all my friends in touch with all my new friends. One of the things that has always been a passion for me is to give our students who are really talented exposure at the very early stage to the international, at the international level. And this was because I realized the value that I had when, after completing my PhD in India, I went to the University of Cambridge for my postdoc. suddenly I realized I'd been very, very well trained, but I had not been taught to really think big. I always thought that, this is my position, this is what I should do, and my dreams were very humble and not and not commensurate with my talent. I was like, let me solve this problem because it's a solvable problem. And then it was in England that I realized that we should all try to catch hold of problems that we think are actually unsolvable and try to solve them. That was the reason why I felt it's really important to take our students and put them along with everybody else as early as possible so that they can start believing in themselves and their capabilities. Not be worried about whether I will succeed, but rather to try something that whatever you do is going to make a difference. And that was one of the reasons why I started, I looked around for this Corona Bose program, which was really looking at elite students and placing them in the best universities in the US. This was a program that was started by Asim Ansari, and we tried to expand it to include University of Chicago and a few other universities. It's really now become a signature program in the US, where it's built up such a brand, and these kids are so amazing that once someone hosts a Corona scholar, they will never again say no to any student who is a Corona scholar. We don't have to try to convince them at all. And it's a long vision. This is a program which takes a 10-year turnaround time because it takes 10 years of training from their first exposure to actually becoming, reaching the quality where you come back to India and start contributing. Some of our Corona scholars have come back and are now assistant professors here. We're very proud of them. And we hope that this program continues. We're also trying to build a program called the SciROI, which is to bring people who finish, young Indians who are actually now job ready, to try and bring them back to India in various capacities and put them in touch with the movers and shakers of Indian science here. And that is also a program that seeks to bring back talent into India. So this is one of my other passions.
Great, thank you very much. And last but not the least, my colleague, Supratik, who is a professor in the Pritzker School for Molecular Engineering, and he's also a senior scientist and a senior advisor at AGA National Lab. So he bridges sort of between the university setting and the national laboratory type of setting. So for those of you who were here in the first panel this morning, you already seen the preview that Michael Greenstone gave of the water quality data that he has actually been working on using his sensor technology to examine the pollution, contamination, and water quality around India's and different rivers. So, Supratik.
Okay, thank you, Kai, for the kind introduction. So, I'm interested in, and I work in the area of sensor networks and sensors and this whole business of data and how do you analyze it. And if you look at this, we all are aware of this huge explosion in data over the past 10 years or so. And there's two types of data. One is what I would call transactional, banks, social networks, et cetera, comes out of a computer. And the other is physical data. And there's a sort of overwhelming opinion that physical data, which means data that comes out of a sensor that's measuring something using the laws of physics or chemistry, is going to be dominant going forward, right? And this is the area I'm interested in. And we feel that there's tremendous impact that this can have in the area of environmental science. Right? Area that I'm interested in is water and soil. And the concept that is interesting here is what I'd like to call the concept of the Geopixel. If you could just put that one slide, would appreciate it. But if you think of this world and you take a pixel of land or water, at high resolution, and against that pixel you can stack a whole bunch of data, right? And then you could use all of these different layers of data to create new layers of data. And this is sort of a vision that we have. It's a long-term vision where you want to basically quantify the world in terms of its response, in terms of its environmental parameters. What we've started working on in India has been in water monitoring. There isn't enough water quality data in the world, and particularly in countries like India. As an example, for instance, in India, on average along a river, there is data collected every 40 kilometers, and this data is taken every 3 weeks to every 4 weeks. But many of the times this data gets corrupted somewhere between taking the data and going to the lab and recording it. And that's not a good situation, right? If you want to improve quality, if you want to improve the way we manage water, I think we ought to take advantage of all of these new techniques that are coming up in terms of data handling and analysis, and that's what we're trying. So about 2.5 years ago, we began a project here with really a bunch of young people here, all of them under 30, extremely bright, and a group of undergraduates at the University of Chicago, with the idea. So we had a 3-phase goal, right? The first phase was trying to establish the technology. Can we measure sort of water parameters with high spatial resolution repeatedly in various regions, and then curate the data and make it available to everybody? So that was one of the key goals, that this data has to be available to everybody, and we actually even turned down funding because, you know, we weren't getting that ability to have it freely disseminated. So that's what we started doing, right? So it was a matter of figuring out what to sense, getting the sensors. We typically use mobile sensors. They're connected with GPS units. You get on a boat, the boat goes on a sortie on the river, and when you come out, you have basically heat map data of 10 to 12 parameters of the water, and we back it up with lab data and so on and so forth. So, you know, this is just an example, for instance, in the town of Narsapur. And once you start mapping this data, you start seeing the benefits of it. So in this sort of inverted U shape, this is the Godavari River. And in the town of Narsapur, there's a solid waste dump by the river. Right? And essentially, you can see hotspots there if you typically measure things like dissolved oxygen, or you measure electrical conductivity, which tells you about the concentration of ions in the solution. You see that the water is leaching that stuff out from the solid waste dump, and it's flowing. Right? So using this sort of technique, you can try to pinpoint sources of pollution, things like that. Right? So that's the first part, and in a sort of 2.5-year project that was funded initially by Gates Foundation, and later we're very thankful for the Tata Center for funding. We've developed that technology, the curation, etc. The second step is a little more complicated, which is now connecting this to the regulatory aspects, to measurement protocols, and in the end, I think what is needed is some kind of business model or a revenue model, right? And for that, we're just starting to connect and work with government organizations. We are measurements people. We're not social scientists. We're not environmentalists. But we are beginning the process of working with these researchers and people. So we're working with the Delhi Pollution Control Commission, the UP government, the World Bank, in trying to have pilot experiments where we're trying to figure out sources of pollution, types of pollution, how it affects the river, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third step, which I think is the hardest one, is to try to connect it to social impact in terms of people's livelihoods, in terms of their jobs, in terms of their health, et cetera. And we've just started doing that. That's a trickier thing, connecting to that aspect. So that's sort of the overall goal. That's where we are headed. I think in the end of the day, you want to be able to have this map of water or soil quality and be able to predict a bunch of things. We are beginning to heavily use machine learning techniques. What we are learning is that we don't have enough training data. Typically for these types of analysis, you need a lot of training data on which to train your models. And in something like environmental science, it's expensive and it's time consuming to get training data. So this is one of the things that we're discovering. In that sense, in the long term, I envision that we would require shared data that is available to everybody, that is tagged, metadata, along the lines of, what's called ImageNet. How many of you know what is ImageNet here? Maybe just raise your hands. Okay. So we all know how successful handwriting recognition is or image recognition is. You can recognize your friends on Facebook, et cetera, automatically. The reason all that works is because there's a huge database called ImageNet, where you got pictures of cats, dogs, animals, people, that's all tagged. And Google, Yahoo, Amazon, everybody trains their data on it, and this is why this stuff is so successful, right? If we are to use machine learning, et cetera, in these types of sensor networks, in cyber-physical systems, we really need this massive sort of ImageNet equivalent. And that's what, in the long run, we'd like to do for environmental science, that you have water data in different regions, different circumstances, meta-tagged, that you use as training. So this is sort of a long-term goal that we're trying to do, working with our colleagues here in India through the University of Chicago. That is, Chicago office, Delhi, that has simply been fantastic, along with the TCD folks over here and the IIC folks before that. So without all of that, all this stuff just would not have happened for us. So thank you very much. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Okay.
That's great. That provides a really nice overview. So in the discussion, it seems to be two themes kept coming up, sort of data analytics, machine learning, that's one, and really the training of students. So I want to hear a little bit more, for example, from Sandeep, right? From your position in SERC, you get to see a lot of interesting science. You did mention cyber-physical system. Supratik just mentioned that as well, and the funding, mentioned in the next 5 years. So if I were to ask you to have, a crystal to see through, what do you think are the big investment Indian science is going to make?
So I talked about one major national mission, which is in the area of cyber-physical systems. So that is one real big mission that we would like to see to come to fruition. So that said, having said this, what we also realize that this mission is not only limited to these 5 or 6 verticals that we have envisaged, but it is going to feed into a larger system of sort of smaller projects or sort of short-term domains where we can take these artificial intelligence, or as Professor Guha was pointing out, to say metadata, environmental data. So we would like our systems that are going to be fed by these national missions to be used in a variety of research where we can still map them out to sectoral aggregates which are health for us, health, energy, environment, defense. So is it possible for us, that's a question we ask, is it possible for us that through this particular national mission, can we then align it, or can we come up with solutions which are also going to be beneficial for other larger activities where we have been investing on and off over these period of years? So a result coming out of one mission, we believe should be applicable or should be helpful to everything else that we are doing. For example, we are trying to build a cancer grid, right? So is it possible for us to have our artificial networks or neural networks trained in a way that we could feed into our cancer grid, right? So that is one big aspect. So we envisage that having spent big ticket money on these missions such as cyber physical system, we will eventually able to blossom many areas which would use these technologies, develop technologies, and then we will be able to sort of look at other possibilities or more focused interventions, technological interventions in those areas. That is one. Then we also look at, as you say, you're looking at the crystal ball. We are also looking at some profound research ideas. So that is one of our, again, a mission that has been conceptualized by us, SERC and DST, where we a priori tell our investigators that we are looking at profound research ideas which are not even blue sky. I mean, you have to have certain amount of, a large degree of uncertainty of success. And given if you are able to crack that particular problem, we will register our presence at the global stage. So this program is called as SERC Supra. It is recently launched. It is again part of our Prime Minister's first 100 days of agenda, and the PM would monitor, PM office would monitor for next 5 years. So this project again, or this initiative again, is not limited to a particular research areas, but we will fund to any extent possible areas or ideas which are quite unique, and then again looking at the various national missions where we would like to strengthen our presence. So for example, health is very dear to us. You may have been seeing outside environment, pollution, that is really a big concern. So many of these programs, the funds which are being invested, the taxpayers' money which is being invested, should have results which are measurable, quantifiable, yet they have to be aligned to major initiatives, national initiatives, where we can sort of deliver technological solutions. So everything is going to be technology, everything is going to be driven by data, driven by these artificial intelligence, and we would like to bring it together, say 10 to 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. And the seeds have been sowed as we speak, and even 5-7 years back. And that's the whole sort of our wish, basically, that the deliverables should be clear, the outcome should be quantifiable, aligned with our national interests. Mm-hmm. And one thing I forgot to mention, we also are engaged in our defense sector. So because we would like to sort of cut down on imports in defense, our government announced a 40,000 crore defense corridor, where certain sections or certain sectors within defense imports that are possibly the low-hanging fruits, could we sort of come up with interventions with that kind of committed money and create footprints of indigenous technologies, followed by translation into smaller industries, small-scale industries, to deliver those niche solutions. So that is one very, very critical area for us, and we are funding quite heavily in this domain as well.
Great. So all the panelists also touch on the fact that we have students on both sides of training of the next generation of scientists and engineers, and we have heard about the BOS and the Corona Scholars Program. One question I have is that, how do you see that as something that can be scaled up, that would affect more students and be placed in sort of more university? And likewise, how would the US be able to sort of do the reverse of bringing their students to India and really start real collaborations, in your mind?
So I can say that the Corona program actually does place students from the US mm-hmm. In Indian universities. So when I was at the National Center for Biological Sciences, I actually hosted a student from, I think, Grinnell College, mm-hmm. Who had come in and actually done a really good project. So it's actually a two-way program where when the student comes in from abroad, the hosting university takes care of the accommodation and living expenses for the student. But we have to like scale it up a little, mm-hmm. Little more. And I think, I'll be open to ideas on how we could do that, because mm-hmm. Clearly we have, when we do the selections, although there's funding for like 100 students to go either way, the depth of talent is so great that there's no difference between the person who's 99 and 199. So we can easily expand the pool. It's just a question of where the resources must come from.
And Supratik, in terms of your work, how do you see as the global collaborations in these sort of large sensing environmental science, and how do you bring students and researchers?
I think something like this is probably not possible without this sort of collaboration. And what I've found is sort of, there is an automatic, the young men and women working here, the undergrads working in UChicago, they almost sort of speak the same kind of language, same software, same equipment. They're collaborating over all kinds of communication capabilities. I think that is working very well, that sort of collaboration. I think there could be an exchange of, I would say, cultures of doing science and engineering, which I think is important. I'll give you an example. So my colleagues in India are very good in analysis. They're not that good in sort of day-to-day engineering. Right? So if we buy a very sophisticated sensor, right, and we now stick it in the water in the boat, and I come here and we find the way we do this here is we take this sensor, we take a big piece of bamboo, and every time we tie this with coconut rope. Right? And it takes time. And this is a cultural thing, right? And I went through this myself as a student and then going to the US. Now, if this were the US, if this were an undergrad there, he'd design a jig with an aluminum alloy and a quick clamp, and he'd build it, take the time, build it, and be done with it, right? And this is, and I can kind of say this because I have one foot in each country. But this is the kind of thing that I see really needs to happen, right? It happened to me, I went through it, and I kind of, we've talked about it with my colleagues here many, many times. But this is the kind of thing that I see is happening.
It's the experiential type of learning
Is the-
that
is the
when
co-
you
is
have
the-
to be
Yeah,
immersed in
yeah.
a different culture. And
Yeah, there is a cultural component. And I've seen my Indian young colleagues also learn from, my team members over here many times in how to, do websites, set things up there where these guys have a lot of strengths in those areas. So it's two ways.
Yamuna, I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the transition, or the range of activities from being a sort of lab scientist to being innovator, and then taking the step to being an entrepreneur in the scientific area. And that's a whole spectrum.
Yeah, it's scary. Nobody's more scared than me. So actually all of this started because of, as I was telling you about this breakthrough technology that we developed to look at cells. Just to bring everybody on the same page, I mean, there was a time when, if you had diabetes, it was considered a death sentence. Today we know that you can manage diabetes even if you cannot cure it, right? And the change happened when we finally got a chemical correlate, and that chemical was blood sugar. Right? So then you could monitor your sugar levels, and by taking data from large number of people, we started to say, okay, you can, and you're looking at your own sugar levels, you can find out when you're pre-diabetic, right? And then all you need to do is incorporate lifestyle changes and your diet and things like that, and you can delay the onset of diabetes. But neurodegenerative diseases right now, when you go to the doctor, the state of neurodegeneration is such that he will only tell you, or she will only tell you that, oh, sorry, you have Alzheimer's, or sorry, you have Parkinson's, and it's too late. So we have come up with a method by which we can, we believe, come up with a single test, a chemical test, that will inform you on the severity and your responsivity to drugs for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And this is what we are doing through a company that I've just launched called SERC. It's really the culmination of about 8 to 10 years of work that started in India, where we developed a way by which we could look at the level of chemicals inside subcompartments of your cells called organelles. Now, just like organs of the body perform very specific functions for the body, organelles of cells perform very specific functions for cells. And one of the organelles that that's important in Alzheimer's is an organelle called the lysosome, which is also the stomach of the cell. So we, people have always known of, biologists and clinicians, they've always known about the role of organelles in health and disease. Because when organs malfunction, very many times, this is due to specific organelles in the cells comprising that organ that malfunction. And although we've known about this fact for decades, clinicians haven't been able to leverage this knowledge in the way they've been able to leverage, for example, DNA sequence information. And as a chemist, I feel that until we get molecular and chemical descriptions of organelle normalcy and abnormality, we'll never be able to use this for disease diagnosis, for early diagnosis, and for personalized medicine, and to develop therapies for diseases which actually have nothing right now. And so what we did was to develop a method by which we could use DNA-based nanodevices to make measures of ions in organelles of cells. And the best analogy I can think of is if you take a car and you put sensors for different gases and temperature and pressure in different parts of your car engine, and you rev the engine at different speeds and you keep measuring the output, and you take the data from many, many engines, then simply just by plugging your laptop in now, and just recording the output from your car engine, and looking at aberrant levels of these chemicals from your different parts of the car that's given to you by your sensors, without even opening the hood of your car, you already know which part is dysfunctional, right? And you know what needs to be done, what needs to be replaced. And we think of the cell like an engine. And the technology we've come up with is a way by which we can send our sensors to these different parts and simply record what is the normal metabolic state of your cell. And because this uses live cells, what we realized was this is a disruptive technology, and the live cell imaging and live cell diagnostics is something which is a little ahead of its time, even in the US. And so that was one of the reasons why we had to move there. And now we've actually, in the last 5 years of really hard work, we've been able to actually get this out, show that this is possible in a disease that afflicts infants and young children. It's called childhood Alzheimer's. It's a disease called Niemann-Pick C. So that's what we've done and published from University of Chicago. But we want to take this forwards to Alzheimer's, which affects a very large population. And so we're now working in collaboration also with an Indian company that's also a spin-out from National Center for Biological Sciences, where they're making a small box which actually looks at sort of biological fluids. And using our technology, also able to find out antibiotic resistance and responsivity in patient samples. So this is something. This is a company called RapidDex spun out from National Center for Biological Sciences, where I used to work. And so yes, I'm really excited about this cross-country collaboration. And I think there are many, many opportunities such as this, where sort of startups and spin-outs from US companies, from US universities and Indian universities can productively collaborate in this way, in this space as well.
Great. Perhaps with that, we'll open the discussion to the audience. Any questions for the panelists?
So I feel like we've talked a lot about people who are super talented and extraordinary and have profound ideas already. But I feel like there are a lot of people who are just good. Like they're not bad, they're just good, they're not extraordinary. And I'm wondering what sorts of programs and what sort of support you guys envision for those people so that we can increase the number of people who do become extraordinary or have the chance to become extraordinary. So kind of earlier programs.
So I can start. So we have, as I was mentioning, we have program at all levels, and one of the cornerstones of public funding is that it has to be competitive in nature. So while we all appreciate that, you know, the contributions come from various strata. I mean, you start from super talented, as you mentioned, to good, you just your regular bread and butter person, right? So, but still, because funding is from public money, it has to be competitive in nature. So we have programs where we have higher success rates that allows you to catch more number of colleagues who have the potential, once they are funded, to step up their game and they become better, right? Because at the end of the day, money spent has to have some returns, and that's where we are. So we are not so exclusive that we miss out on very many colleagues who are trying to make good science, right? So we have programs. I mean, if you can go through our website and look at other programs available. So at every age group, at every level of competency, and even at the stages of you are in CFTI, what our technical wording is, it's a good institution, say IITs or IIC, vis-a-vis if you are in a central university or a state university. So we have customized programs which would allow the competition not between, say, state school and IIT, right? So we still have programs where we would exclusively cater to smaller institutions, sort of B or C grade universities. We have those programs. So we would expect at the end of the day that once you have that funding, you would like to then go for a higher level of funding and make yourself more competitive so that you could get a better grant, right? So opportunities do exist. I hope that answers your question.
My name is Venkat. I'm a Chicago booth alum. Firstly, thank you so much. It's been very illuminating conversation, and I speak for me and my colleagues here. I think we are very excited to see the kind of work which you're doing, and hoping that next Nobel Prize in Science goes to University of Chicago as well. My question, however, is for Mr. Verma. You said that the government has now put forward some 4,000 crores, which on the face of it is about $500 million. I'm just wondering, it seems less, right, compared to, say, what China is spending, which I think is $150 billion just on AI. Are you looking at some sort of a private partnership to increase the funding for this? Like, are you looking at doubling this 4,000 crores? Or are you looking at public-private partnerships, number one? Number two is, given that you have, relatively speaking, limited resources, are there certain priority sectors where your focus would be? Because based on what you're sharing with us, it seems that you're trying to achieve a lot, and all of them good things, but is it realistically feasible? You're looking at fundamental research, you're looking at something which applies to small-scale industries, you're looking at education. 4,000 crores can quite easily get broken up, and is it realistic enough to achieve that kind of impact you're looking at?
So 4,000 crore commitment comes from the fact that this is the first initiative of its kind, and we have to still look at that how well we utilize and how well we make. Yeah.
Sorry, just to follow up on that.
Sorry.
What are the metrics of success you're looking at for this 4,000 crores?
So metrics of success, I mean, first of all, it is just launched, right? So what we are looking at is that at least 6 to 15, what we call as technology innovation hubs. So where we, so it's not really 4,000 because we also have a national supercomputing mission. So to create the right ambience and infrastructure for, say, AI and deep learning, we have already given quite a bit of money to make these institutions sort of at the cutting edge in terms of their computing power. Now, having done this, Now we are coming up with more money, and the idea is that if we are able to successfully seed some of these programs, say 6 to 12 technology innovation hubs, and based on this hub and spoke model, if we can bring in more collaborators to solve a problem, say AI in healthcare or AI in, say, cancer detection, then it should be possible for us to go for other funding. There are quite a number of funding mechanisms available where one could tap in and get extra funds. So ideally speaking, that is also my earnest desire, that we are not going to be limited by this 4,000 crores, which if you divide and you say you compute in dollars, of course it may not look that impressive. But it is indeed a very, very good step in the right direction. That is point one. And we are not averse to having funds from industry, Indian industry or multinationals. But again, I don't have to tell this audience, it's a very uphill task. And we have been hearing the possibility of having corporate social responsibility funds coming to research. But well, I hope I won't retire before that happens, right? So basically, the intent is there. Intent is there means the end user, which is your investigator, they are poised to take us to the right, to take us in the right direction. Now, I would like to see, the ministry would like to see the intent from other stakeholders. Just last week, I gave lecture in Intel Bangalore. And if you think that I am a chemist or a biologist, I wouldn't be speaking to people, business heads of Dell, Intel, Texas Instruments and all. They are now warming up to the idea that perhaps there is a need to create a corpus with us, right? So what we also offer them, that if you give X dollars, we will make it 2X. Right? So if you give $100, we will put $100. We create a corpus, and then we solve problems which are outstanding, which are very close to a given industry or a group of industries. Right? So there are mechanisms in place. There is a clear intent of bringing in corporate money for research, and I hope it will happen. But I am very positive, although I'm only 6 months in the job. Right? That positivity coming from academic side to now being with the government, I can see that positive energy, if you will, that things are moving in the direction. There is money, and I was telling somebody just a while back, it is impossible not to get a good idea funded. I mean, you will get money. There is plenty of money to go around if the idea is outstanding and very good idea. So ecosystem, again, a sort of word used too many times. I mean, that is really supportive, and I hope we are in the right direction.
Hi, I'm Carlos Fernandez from Singapore, a Booth alum. And so my question is for Professor Krishnan. I was just you talked about degenerative disease, yeah, and you touched upon that. I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on metformin, because I'm reading a lot about it, and it would be interesting if you could shed some light on it.
Oh, wow. So I think metformin is right now used for diabetes, right? So, I think there are different kinds of diabetes, right? And so metformin is really used for one kind. Again, I'm not a specialist in diabetes, but at some point you also get resistant to many of these drugs, right? So which is why diabetes is not curable; it's only manageable. Yeah.
So actually, my question was more about people using metformin because of its potential effects on anti-aging or degenerative effects, as opposed to like a diabetes thing.
Yes.
Like, I mean, I experiment with myself, but I want to know a little more besides getting my information. So that was the context of my question.
May I take this offline? May I take this offline? Thank you.
Further questions from the audience?
So I think I can be loud enough. So all of you talked about workforce, and a lot of the applications you're talking about involve team science. And it's not something that's taught at the PhD level. It's not something that's encouraged. A lot of research is solitary. So I'm wondering, with your experiences, is that something that can be packaged and brought into universities as part of the curriculum? I know in the US, REU sites are great because they help to bridge the gap between what you learn in a classroom and solving problems. So is there a way, mechanisms that you think are useful for team science, and how to inculcate that at an early stage?
I can comment on that. So I have some thoughts on that. I used to work in industrial research and development for 20 years, and then I joined academia. And I think this is something where industrial research and industry leads, their business models, their funding models, etc., forces them to be successful in team science. And academia is getting there, but is not quite at that level. So I think the best way to do this, in my view, is through academic interactions, probably in India as well, similarly. So I think it's a very important point you raised, that a lot of what we're doing is increasingly multidisciplinary, team-oriented. But this is something that I think academia really needs to learn from industry.
And if I may add that I think the funding mechanism actually drives a lot of this collaboration and team science. And so in the US, the funding mechanism has moved into sort of large center grants in which interdisciplinarity is important, and therefore you're forced to work between two groups or among different groups to get at the scientific problem. And so, with things like the Materials Research Science and Engineering Center, the various sort of science and technology centers that are around, that we actually see this very robust ecosystem in which regular joint group meeting is working, and people with different expertise, speaking different language, so to speak, actually help each other to get at the problems.
So, I'm reminded of something I heard one of my friends say, that my 17 years of schooling never prepared me for my job. And I think it's because in school, we are all judged by what we learn, what I answer by myself on this paper. And so we never actually teach kids the value of teamwork in class. But they know about teamwork on the field when they play a game, right? And so that's the maximum amount of a team taught philosophy, right, that they have. So at least what I'm trying to do now in Chicago is actually grade my students based on teamwork, where they have to write a term paper, they have to choose somebody else in class, and together you write a term paper, and you will be graded together. Yes, so both of you will have the same grade on the paper, but there are other mechanisms that will ensure. But this actually teaches you team science right from the undergraduate level at least. And I wonder whether we should have more activities which are team-based, where you divide up students in classes right from your science classes or science education, and go do a project together, right? Write it up together, and then grade them together. I think initiatives like this will help them understand that it's really the team that counts. You have to make the best presentation or the best project together. In my lab, when I was in India, I arranged it such that my students had no choice but to work with each other by putting people with very, very different expertise together on the same project, so that it was very clear who had done what, but at the same time the combination was 1 + 1 made 11. So a geneticist would be paired with a chemist, or a molecular biologist would be paired with a photochemist. And so they would be able to do things which they couldn't do by themselves. And the moment they saw that, they were able to access a level of science that they couldn't do by themselves, but they were 50% a part of. They were sold on team science. And we should also reward team science, at every level in India. Our reward systems must incorporate that, right? Whereas in the US, the reward system is you get grants, you get money, right? And that's the reward. But here we have to be able to recognize and appreciate effective teams, because positive incentive trumps negative incentive every time. Yes.
Seeing the system both in India and now in University of Chicago or US, do you have some comments on how we can improve? I think we have a lot of people who can influence policies in the country.
Yes.
Here, because
Yes.
you have seen both the systems.
Yes.
How can we have funding mechanisms being discussed? How can we make it? Because we have money,
Yes.
we have people, we have talent.
Yes.
How can we make the grade?
So I think we are in a particularly interesting point in time in Indian science, because at least three major leaders in the administrative part of the Indian science, which is the chair of SERC, who's sitting on my right, the principal scientific advisor to the Prime Minister of India, and the Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, are all scientists par excellence who have achieved international recognition, who know what it is to work at the very cutting edge, and they are certainly aware of what needs to be done to make sure that we can scale, right? I think this is a very nice time that we can actually put in place mechanisms by which we can thermalize with the US and other countries. And quite frankly, India is not bad. If you're sitting on the moon and you're looking at science across the world, there are a few hotspots, and India is quite competitive. I think the reason why we are articulating this is because we see that we can certainly be on the world stage. But I think it requires a little more of thermalization, a little more of it's okay if we are sending 1,000 people to the US and 900 stay behind. If 100 come back that have been trained at the best places, that still gives us a leverage, and we shouldn't be afraid. I feel we should not be hesitant to spend $100 and say, okay, we're going to lose a little bit, but we're going to gain much more in the long term. And it's like a business, right? In the beginning, you're not going to make a profit, but then the profit comes in later. So
I'll tell you one of the things I have learned. So if you look at the agencies that control funding in the US, like the Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, et cetera, when they decide on a certain area, so let us say the Department of Energy says, we want to figure out whether we should invest in microelectronic science or not. It is an extremely rigorous, formalized process that has been developed over years, to the point where it is, nothing is perfect, but it's as close to perfect as possible, right? So if they want to, as an example, microelectronics, they will start with creating a workshop. There will be about 80, 90 experts from industry, from academia, from various stakeholders in the workshop. There'll be panelists. They will spend up to 6 to 8 months in creating a report for that. That will then be socialized through the various hierarchies within that scientific organization. And this is for how the Department of Energy does it. There are similar mechanisms in National Science Foundation, et cetera. So in the end of the day, when they decide to put their money, there is a very formal, democratized way where everybody gets to have a say. This is then vetted, and it's a very clear targets, right? And then this whole process of proposals and evaluation, et cetera, is benchmarked along the way. So it's a very sophisticated process that drives this entire scientific direction, the connection to industry, that I think it's worth it's worth looking at seriously. And this is something I don't think it's as sophisticated in Europe or Japan or anywhere else. And it's something that I've learned over the past 5-6 years that I've been getting into this.
We can take one more questions before we wrap up. Any further questions from the audience? Well, if not, we'll thank the panelists for a very exciting discussion.
Thank you.